order.
The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Sullivan.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members of the House, I've known since last November who I wanted to speak about during Black History Month this year. I want to introduce to the chamber a gentleman named Irving Comer, who was the Arlington County Police Department's very first African-American police officer. Mr. Speaker, this body regularly demonstrates its great respect for first responders and law enforcement, and Officer Irving Comer was one of the finest. I'm sorry to have to say that Officer Comer passed away just a few months ago in November of 2017. Mr. Speaker, Irving Comer was born on December 30th, 1942, right here in Richmond, the oldest of 7 siblings. From an early age, his intelligence and leadership shone bright. He was a member of the National Honor Society and president of the Student Council at Armstrong High School, where he graduated as salutatorian in a class of 455. He received a full scholarship to Virginia State College, but had to leave after 2 years to help raise his brothers and sisters. He served in the Marines from 1963 to 1967, where he was eventually promoted to the rank of sergeant. And then, Mr. Speaker, luckily for Arlington, Irving applied in 1967 to be a communications clerk with the county police department. As Irving described it, he had had negative encounters with the police as a teenager in Richmond, so he was a bit wary of working for law enforcement. Plus, he would be the first black person ever hired by the department. His dedication to service prevailed, however, Mr. Speaker, and he took the job. Irving performed so well that after only 3 months, the chief of police asked him to consider joining the force as an officer. Irving initially rejected that offer, Mr. Speaker. He was concerned that he would be limited to only policing minority neighborhoods. It was only after the chief assured him that we'd be able to serve the entire community of Arlington that Irving agreed to be promoted from administrative clerk to police officer. And it was at that time, Mr. Speaker, that Irving Comer made history as Arlington County's first black policeman. It was December 1967, Mr. Speaker, and Irving was just 25 years old. The Washington Post ran a headline about it. Quote, "Arlington hires former Marine as county's first Negro policeman." For context, Mr. Speaker, Fairfax County had just 1 black officer. The Virginia State Police, none. Little did Arlington know how much young Officer Comer was about to change Arlington County for the better. Mr. Speaker, Officer Comer changed policing in Arlington for the better. He created the first ever ride-along program in the county and became an instructor at the Northern Virginia Criminal Justice Training Academy. He ultimately served the Arlington County Police Department for 24 years. Officer Comer changed Arlington Public Schools for the better. In 1969, Officer Comer became a school resource officer at Thomas Jefferson Junior High School. This was just as racial integration in schools was beginning in the face of lawsuits and opposition from white Arlingtonians. At Thomas Jefferson, Irving took initiative by creating the Juvenile Delinquency Prevention Program, sponsored the Student Law Enforcement Club, and the Students' Day at the Court Program. Officer Comer was so successful as a school resource officer, Mr. Speaker, that Arlington County Public Schools decided that SROs should be assigned to every high school in the county. Irving even served as a public school teacher later in his career. Officer Comer changed our colleges for the better, Mr. Speaker. While serving the police department, Officer Comer returned to higher education nearly a decade after leaving to support his family. He received a Bachelor of Science degree from AU, American University, and then a Master of Science degree in 1975 from Southern Illinois. Typical of Irving Comer, he then gave back to the academic field as a part-time professor at the Northern Virginia Community College and Germanna Community College. And in one of the most important parts of his legacy, Mr. Speaker, Officer Comer changed the lives of African-American Arlingtonians forever and for the better. He understood that with his unprecedented position in the department came the power to influence how the police interacted with racial minorities and how racial minorities could and should be represented in the police force. For example, Mr. Speaker, he led a federally funded initiative as the Director of Minority Recruitment, successfully bringing African Americans into the law enforcement field and increasing much-needed diversity in our police force. In 1983, Mr. Speaker, with 15 years as a police officer under his belt, and despite the trails he had already blazed, Officer Comer risked his career to publicly stand up against still stubborn discrimination in the Arlington County Police Department. He led a group of 7 black policemen, dubbed the Magnificent Seven, in a lawsuit filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The 7-officer suit revealed a long-standing pattern of racial discrimination in the department that had prevented black officers from reaching the supervisor level. Their claim also included the ugly truth that, in their words, quote, traditionally and to the present, white supervisory and line officers alike have engaged in the use of racial slurs, epithets, and comments. These actions have been open and notorious, end quote. The Magnificent Seven were successful, Mr. Speaker. Arlington County agreed to increase promotions for minorities and women. Finally, Mr. Speaker, Officer Comer also changed our community for the better by fathering 2 smart and successful daughters, Pamela, who works in the medical administration field, and Angela, who is now herself a first sergeant with the Arlington County Police Department. They're here with us today, Mr. Speaker, in the galley, as are his 2 sisters, his niece, his longtime companion, Ms. Francie Long, and his mother, Ruth Comer. Mr. Speaker, Officer Comer didn't just believe in the law, he believed in justice, and he acted to strengthen both. Irving Comer will be deeply missed, but his important work in Arlington and the Commonwealth will never be forgotten. Please join me, Mr. Speaker, and members of the House, in welcoming his family, and I ask them to rise as we recognize and honor Irving Comer.
The House would certainly like to welcome and honor the entire Comer family. It's an incredible legacy that Irving left, not only the police officer, teacher, and fighting discrimination. So thank you all for coming. It's quite an honor to have you all today. Thank you, Delegate Sullivan.